Hello and welcome to the Aquarius Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Reed. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by none other than Aquarium Co-Op. Head on over to aquariumcoop.com. Check out all the awesome things that we have for sale at aquariumcoop.com. The Aquarium Co-op coarse sponge filter that sinks instantly to the bottom. Nice coarse foam so you don't have to do the maintenance all the time. It is a wonderful product. Pair that up with some Aquarium Co-op airline tubing with a Zis Never Clog air stone, and you are set to have air-driven, wonderful filtration in your aquarium. Not only do we have things like the Aquarium Co-op sponge filter, we have a wide selection of extreme foods with my personal favorite, the krill flake, that practically everything in my aquarium or in my fish tanks will eat. Couple that with extreme slow sinking pellets or the semi-floating or the fast sinking pellets as well. Fantastic fish food that I actually has kind of turned into my staple super nose. There you go, folks. Super red bristle nose staple food. It's got spirulina in it. It's got krill. Just a fantastic food all around. And the colors that I get in my super reds are fantastic. And in addition to those kinds of products, we have a massive selection of live aquarium plants. Vallisneria, water sprite, dwarf chain sword. What else are we bringing on? Red melon sword, red flame sword. Always trying to keep things like Java moss on steel mats in stock for you. So if you want that for your shrimp tank, we've got it. Floating Christmas moss balls. Such a cool thing to add to your aquarium to get this like mid to lower level water column feature that if you've got shrimp in your tank, the shrimp are going to love interacting with that thing, seeing your fish swim around a floating Christmas moss ball. Those we always like to keep in stock. Well, we like to keep all of our plants in stock, but those usually have no problem keeping those in stock, and they are just such a cool feature to add into your aquarium. Let's see what else. Jungle Vallisneria, Crypt. We recently brought on Crypt Wendeti Green. There's my favorite Crypt, Crypt Tropica. That is just this beautiful textured leaf crypt. So ton of different plants for you. Aquarium Co-op, for the most part, aside from selling you the actual aquarium itself and the fish, one-stop shop, fish foods, dechlorinators, all the accessories you need, aquarium lighting. Right now, we were able to secure some 3.0s, so time-relevant Fluval 3.0s. Head on over to aquariumcoop.com. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Friday, August 21st, 2020. My guest today is John Lyons. John is the curator of fishes at the University of Wisconsin Zoological Museum. Previously, John spent over 30 years as a research scientist with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. In addition to his work with the native fish of Wisconsin, John also has a passion for the fish of central Mexico and serves as the chair of the North American branch of the Goodeid Working Group. John's education includes a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Union College in New York and Master of Science and PhD degrees from the University of Wisconsin. John is also a frequent contributing author to Amazonas Magazine. So, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Randy. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to make this happen. And you know, it seems like with more and more of my guests, I've have these things where I have to reschedule with them. So thank you for showing me grace and still being willing to come on and be a fish nerd and talk fish with me.
Well, I'm retired, so every day is a Saturday for me.
Oh, nice.
I'm partially retired, I should say. My wife jokes at that one, but I only work 40 hours a week now instead of 60.
Oh, and I was gonna say, are you so retired that you don't know what day of the week it is, or are you still?
Occasionally,
Yeah,
occasionally.
because that's when you know you're fully
I have
retired.
enough obligations that I might be off by a day, but usually I at least know it's a weekday
you're,
versus a weekend.
you're plus or minus 24 hours on knowing what day it is.
Yeah, roughly.
That's awesome. I think my neighbors they retired a couple years ago, and they're at least plus or minus 36 hours to 48 hours on what day it is. It is
I
awesome.
do have sometimes when you wake up and you're a little disoriented, yeah, you have to look at a calendar because you're like, whoa, what day is today? But
Oh, good times. So, as the bio says, I mean, you have just this wealth of academic experience. Ichthyologist. I don't want to say in the hobby per se, but as an ichthyologist, you have professional experience as a research scientist with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So clearly, a passion for fish. So, to kick off the origin story for you, John, and don't spare any details for us. How does it all start for you? What's like your earliest memory that starts this passion for fish and ichthyology?
well, my earliest memories are I've always really liked fishing. And so my various earliest memories, I'm probably 4 years old, and it's catching fish. And for whatever reason, and I was just catching little perch or something, nothing, exotic. And for whatever reason, I really took to that, and that became a passion. I just liked being around water, being on the water, in the water. And so once I learned to swim, I got a little snorkeling mask, and I would, snorkel among the fish, and I thought that was really great, and I still loved fishing for them. And then when I was 10 years old, well, no, when I was 11 years old, for my birthday, my parents got me, a little 10-gallon setup. And I had seen, friends and relatives had, tropical fish tanks in their house, and this is back in the 60s.
Was this New York?
Yeah, this is when I
Okay.
was growing up in Southern New York.
Okay.
And so they got me, one of these in metal frame things, and multicolored gravel and fake plastic plants, and this little box filter in the corner. And I just thought this was fantastic, and I would save all my allowance and birthday money and go to the pet store and buy various fish with really no idea of what their needs were and no idea of who was compatible with whom, and what kind of water quality they would need or anything like that. And I just dumped them in the tank because they were cool looking. And of course I just killed everything, fairly regularly. And this is back before people really understood the need for water changes. So the tank would just get really scuzzed. But I had it right in my room, and I loved it. And I every morning I'd wake up, I'd see these fish swimming around, or I'd see them floating dead, depending on the day. But and I had things like guppies and platies, and I was able to breed a few of them, which I thought was amazing. And so that, coupled with my just inherent interest in fish, the fact that if I couldn't be outside actually catching them or observing them, I could just be watching them in my room, and I could get these species from far off lands, at least historic, their origins were from far off lands, and see these crazy beautiful species. So that got me into fish keeping, which I've done with highs and lows on and off for over 50 years now. And then when I went to college and started in an academic career, I really, really liked, fish in the outdoors, but I really had no clue. I had no role model, so I had no idea you could even make a career of it. And I hadn't done very well in science in high school, so I was pretty intimidated of doing anything related to science.
In high school, what did you think your career path was going to be?
Well, I was pretty adrift. I really did, and that was the point. I really didn't have some people know they want to be a doctor, some people know they want to be an engineer, whatever it is. But so I would tell people, and when I first started college, that I was going to be a lawyer, not because I had any passion for the law. I was interested a little bit in politics and particularly international relations, and I thought I might be able to do something there. But I had no role models of biologists or at least biological scientists, and so I didn't really know that. I was vaguely aware there were careers in this field, but I had no way of knowing how you would go there, how you do that. So I started off in college, political science major or pre-law kind of thing, and I really didn't like it. And I started to think, I love the outdoors, I love fish, I love aquatic systems. I got the perception maybe there'd be a way to make a career out of that. And so midway through college, I switched to a biology major, which was a big scramble. And even then, when I went to grad school, I wanted to do something with fish at that point, but I was still a little vague on where I would go, what I would end up doing. And so I just wanted, having spent my whole life in the Northeast, mainly in New York, I just wanted to be in a different part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like trout fishing. And so I basically picked places that there were lots of trout. And so that was the upper Midwest and the Rockies. And through a variety of sort of fortuitous events, I ended up at Wisconsin, which is a fantastic aquatic biology school. And there are certainly lots of trout around here, but there's so many other interesting species as well. And so I came here for graduate school and really just immersed myself in the study of fish and fishes and fisheries, and so I had tanks in my office. I was out collecting fish every day. I was teaching classes where we do experiments and all sorts of things. So I just immersed myself, and I absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I had sort of found my passion somewhat by accident when I look at the sort of this chain of events that got me there.
Mm-hmm.
But once I found it, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I was very lucky when I came out of grad school. I was able to get a job for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, which is the management agency that's in charge of all the aquatic systems and fish and fisheries in the state. And I just had a wonderful job for 33 years that I just loved, and allowed me to get out in all these different environments, all these different species, work on questions, applied questions that were really important in terms of protecting resources and protecting species and enhancing things. And so I really loved that job. And so then people always ask, well, how did you end up in Mexico? How does that lead to Mexico? And again, it was one of these sort of chance things. When I was getting close to finishing my PhD, I was going to go to a conference in Colorado with a number of other grad students to present some of my work. And we got together and we got a van from the university, and we were going to drive all night and go out to Fort Collins, Colorado, and give to this meeting and give presentations and so forth. And I got a phone call. I was sort of the organizer of the van. And I got a phone call from a guy in a different department named Eduardo Santana. And he was a bird ecologist, actually, from the wildlife department. And he asked just, could I bum a ride with you guys out to the conference? And, oh, sure, of course. And so we ended up, by chance, sitting in the back of the van. We're taking turns driving at, 2 a.m. And we just fell into these really deep conversations. And I was already interested in Latin America and tropical fishes and so forth. And so we became really close friends as a result of that trip. And then about a year later, when he finished his degree, he got a job in Mexico at a newly formed biosphere reserve, the Sierra de Manatlan, which is in the west central part of the mountain, sort of the coastal mountain range in the west central part of the country, west of Guadalajara. And he was a bird guy. He was in charge of sort of all the animal life within this reserve. And I was basically the only person he knew who knew anything about fish. So even though I knew nothing about Mexican fishes, nothing about Mexican environments, he invited me down. He said, we've got to do a survey of this reserve. You want to come over and help on this survey? And I jumped at the chance and have never looked back. It was wonderful. We went all over the place, met a bunch of good people, collected a lot of cool fish, including Goodeids. They were the first fish I ever caught in Mexico. And from there, it just gradually evolved into lots of different places and lots of different people and various projects over the years. But that was back in the mid 80s. So it's 35 years ago now.
Yeah, that sounds like one of the opportunities that I would pay somebody to I'll pay you to go help you do this research and do this collecting studies.
And again, it was just luck. If I hadn't had this, he hadn't come along on this ride, we hadn't become friends, he hadn't gotten this job and then thought of me, I don't know if any of this ever would have developed.
Weren't the pre-COVID days great when you could just jump in a van with a bunch of people and go across the country? My goodness.
That was a pretty fun trip for lots of reasons. But that was one of the high points.
So you've definitely piqued my interest in a few different points, and I think one of them is if we were to go back and when you changed gears in undergrad. So I know that from my own personal experience, wanting to be a more formal business major, and then realizing that I didn't spend nearly enough time in pre-calculus in high school to hit the calculus prereqs for a business degree, I switched gears and went to econ because you didn't need the prereq, but it was practically the same degree. That was, not an overly difficult thing, but I know that just changing your major in college is very difficult. And you went from a political science, this soft science kind of thing, to a hard science. That seems like a prereq nightmare. Like, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Like, how difficult was that for you, and especially like the biologies and microbiologies and all those things? If you didn't do well in high school, it sounds like a tough road for you.
Yeah, well, the reason I didn't do well in high school is because I really didn't apply myself. That was part of the problem. And so by the time I went to college, I'd kind of grown up a little and was used to, putting in the work and had the motivation to do the work. So that part was just, getting my act together. But yes, I was definitely intimidated. I didn't think, given my poor background, I didn't think I'd do well. And so originally I thought, well, I'll sort of do a hybrid. I'll do some sort of environmental law, um, where I'll have this environmental focus, but it'll still be law school. But I should take some biology classes, and chemistry classes to kind of get that environmental background. And so I thought I'd give it a try. And the summer, this would have been, I started taking, as a freshman, I just took all the political science and economics and history and all those sorts of things. And then as a sophomore, I decided I would take some of the science as well as continuing to take the political science stuff. And so the summer before, I had a job as a security guard. And it was really super boring job. I hated,
Sure.
but and I did different stuff, but at times I would be just sort of in a building, kind of just sitting there for insurance purposes after hours, and I had sort of nothing to do. And it was really boring. But what I would do is I'd bring in these sort of high school chemistry books and high school biology books, and I would just read them and I would just study them and, do the exercises in the back. And so I really tried to sort of make up for all my deficiencies from high school through that summer. And that actually did help a lot. So when I came into these classes, they were hard. It was an adjustment without a doubt, but I wasn't completely green. I'd been working on this for a few months and sort of remembering or learning things I should have learned in high school. So it took a year, and I was able to graduate in 4 years without having to take extra time, but it meant that my last couple of years I was just jam-packed.
Yeah.
And I was, my last year of college, when you're usually kicking back and you have senioritis, I'm taking organic chemistry and taking all these hard classes with, all these sophomores who want to be doctors. And so it was a little bit weird that way, but I managed it.
And then to go back also to, you kind of glossed over your tropical fish, like aquarist hobbyist experience. So I want to know, look, can you dive a little bit more into, what did you dabble in with tropical fish? Did you, did multiple tank syndrome hit you hard and you ended up, putting 50 fish tanks in your dorm room? Like, what was your experience with the actual aquarium hobby side of things?
Yeah, I never had multiple tank syndrome, mostly because I never had much money. And my mom, there was no way I could have more than one tank, or maybe two. And so for the first few years, I was really into tropical fish, but I had no mentors. I had no, I had little access to good information. So I was just kind of winging it. And I really killed a lot of fish. I really didn't know what I was doing. And so about the time I went to college, I wouldn't call it a 180, but I started to get more interested in local fish that, I could like catch a small fish. And I started to realize that, yeah, you do need to change the water more months. And so I never really had, a room full of fish tanks. That wouldn't have been allowed. And to be honest, couldn't afford it. And I wasn't handy enough, to make my own or anything like that. And so I just have one or two tanks. And because of 2 tanks, I eventually ended up probably paying more attention to them than I would have if I had, 50. And so I just your video.
Yeah, we have a little poor connection right now, so I went ahead and killed the video just to see if that would help it.
Trying to figure out why they weren't doing so well or why they wouldn't breed or, if they got some sort of a disease, how to treat it, everything. University facilities at my fingertips. So we had all these sort of teaching labs where we just had big tanks, and we had tanks with chillers on them for cold water fishes. We had, all sorts of, plumbing and everything to make setting up tanks easy. So at that point, yeah, then I had all sorts of tanks scattered around campus wherever I was, I had lab space and so forth. And I was doing little experiments with fish and maintaining them in these tanks and so forth. And they were all local Wisconsin fishes at that point. So I wasn't, I mean, for class, we'd raise convict cichlids because they were really easy fish to breed. And we would, we'd do that to, we'd have students do observations and do experiments. So I had convicts, and I'd bring some home, and just because they're kind of a cool fish to watch, their behaviors are so interesting. So, and they're so easy to breed. So at that point, I might only have one or two at home, but I'd have a dozen at various points at the university that and I shared this workload with a couple other equally passionate fish heads. So we had a bunch of tanks, and because we could just go out and collect the things ourselves, and often we needed to collect them for various parts of our research, that at that point, most of our tank space was devoted to local fishes.
Yeah,
Few for tropical.
Yeah, I totally see that with anybody that's on the academic side, where you do have, just for work, you tend to have these labs that have multiple tanks, and you're already working with fish. So, you're kind of you're inundated all day long with these fish tanks as as it is, and that tends to kind of satisfy the need to not necessarily have them at home.
Yeah.
And maybe you've got like
No, I had a couple. I had a couple at home, so I'd bring the prettiest fish home, or I'd bring these convicts home just 'cause I like watching them.
Right.
But yeah, and you're again, it's hard to unless you've been there, it's hard to communicate just how much of your life graduate school takes. At least this sort of graduate school. So when I'd come home, it'd be late at night, and last thing I wanted to do was mess around cleaning a fish tank because that's all I've been doing all day.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, the home stuff was just a couple of small tanks just to, have interesting looking fishes to look at when I was eating breakfast or something like that. But yeah, I had lots of tanks at school, and that's sort of how it stayed. And then when I worked for the DNR, started working for the DNR, again, they didn't have the lab space or the facilities, but I'd always try to have a tank or two there when I could, and then I'd start setting up a few more at home. But I've never gotten to the point where I had a whole 50 tanks at once in my house. I think right now I have about a dozen, and that's about as high a number as I've had.
It's funny that when you're looking at it from the aquarist hobbyist perspective, you're when you say a dozen, it's like that's a respectable number, right? But to the average person, they're like, you're insane. You have 12
Yeah, no, exactly.
fish tanks in your house. What is wrong with you? But to an aquarist, it's like that's a good start. That's a solid number.
And you have these people with fish rooms or fish houses, or
yeah,
their whole basement is dedicated, or their garage. And
yep. I built a little 10 by 12 walled off room in my garage, fully insulated, plumbed for auto water change. I've got my tanks range in. I've got maybe four 40 gallons, and then the rest are a combination of 20s, 15s, and 10s. And that's like the ultimate party trick for my wife. It's like, hey, do you want to come see something? Do you want to come see? You want to come see Randy's fish room?
My husband is?
And these people have like a fish room. What? Like they don't grasp it. And then the moment she opens the door, and it's like this, all the light from the LED lighting, the bubbling sounds, the linear piston air pump driving 50 different sponge filter combinations, and it's like what?
Right.
And one of the front and center tanks, the 40 gallons, is one of my grow outs for these Periaba angelfish. So there's like 50 juvenile angelfish just jam packed into a 40 gallon, and they're just the moment they see the door open, they're like, feed me. And so it just ends up being like the ultimate party trick. But yes, I fall into the the crazy category. But then I always have to preface it to these people, to these friends that come over and say, but this is a small fish room. I'm like, there are people like especially if you're in the Midwest or East Coast and you have a basement. I'm like, there's guys and gals that convert their entire basement into fish rooms, and they have 140-gallon tanks. So like wrap your mind around this little 10 by 12 room. That's small, right? Like this is a small operation for the most part. So it's a funny thing, man. It's a real funny thing.
Yeah, and with me the limiting factor has always been, well, there's certainly a space factor, but the real limiting factor has been time. And It's sort of like I always have this uneasy balance between the more tanks I have and the more maintenance and so forth I have to do. That's the less time I can spend actually outside dealing with fish in their native environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always on this, it's winter time, and I should get some more tanks, and I should set up more and get this species and do that. And then come summer, I'm like, why did I do this? It's a beautiful day, and I'm cleaning fish tanks. I got to cut back. And
Yeah.
so I kind of
Yeah.
fluctuate a little that way, and I've never really fallen off the deep end. I know people like that who their whole life is maintaining their fish room, and
Mm-hmm.
they're in it 6 days, 7 days a week for a couple hours a day, and I just never. I always wanted to be out fishing or snorkeling or when I was working or still working, collecting fish or
Mm-hmm.
doing something like that as much, not that I want to do that more, but I wanted to have a balance. I
Well,
wanted to be able to do both.
Well, the hobby, I mean, the aquarist hobby needs people like you that have such a strong passion for the fish that you're going to go out there and do the research. You're going to go out there and snorkel. You're going to take the pictures and you're going to write those articles. So for, 80% of, it's probably even a higher percentage of that, of the people that just stay local to their area, have their fish rooms, have their tanks, subscribe to Amazonas or Tropical Fish Magazine, and then they can live vicariously through people like you because you're out there, going out there in the field, you're doing all this research, you're doing this collecting, you're sharing the stories, you're sharing your experience, and then I think that gives us like, now granted, I want to be more on your side, and I want to go out there and continue to go out and do this international travel and wild fish collecting, not so much the more surveying aspect of it. I don't really want to bring many fish home again after this one first experience, which was fine. But
Yeah.
you know, you're able to read these magazines, live vicariously through your articles, and feel like, yeah, I was just in central Mexico with John, or I was on the Pacific coast in Mexico. I feel pretty satisfied. Now I'm gonna go and do my introvert thing in my fish room and clean my tanks for 5 or 6 hours. Like I think we all we need people like you that aren't gonna be saddled with maintaining 100 tanks. You're actually gonna go out there and do that research and do that collecting.
Yeah, and I well, thank you for that. But I've gotten, my mindset is that much as I appreciate a really cool African cichlid or some kind of armored catfish from South America, I mean they're awesome. But I'm most interested in keeping things that I've actually seen in the wild
Mm.
and seen in their native habitat, and not so much trying to create a complete biotope, but at least have a sense of what the conditions they live under and be able to see these fish that maybe I've seen in some rushing stream and haven't gotten a good look at. Now I can stare at them in a tank and see how they behave and how they breed and so forth. So I as I've gone, when I was younger, yeah, it was just what fish is prettier or what fish looks cooler. But now so a lot of times, a lot of the Goodeids I have are kind of unimpressive looking. A lot of the native fish I keep or have kept, aren't particularly spectacular, but to me they're interesting just based on their habitat or based on some experience I've had collecting them.
Mm-hmm.
So I the other thing I've really fortunately been able to avoid is this idea of every time I see a new species I have to have it, and so I really right now in Goodeids I have, I don't know, what, 4 species, and I rather than and there's 40 different Goodeids out there. And rather than trying to have get a new Goodeid every year, I'm just focusing on these 4 and
Mm-hmm.
trying to maintain them for conservation purposes, but also trying to, understand them better because these are species that at least, well, one of them's extirpated in the wild, but the others I've all seen in the wild and I've all, have some sense of where they live in nature.
Mm-hmm. Which are the Goodid species that you keep?
Right now I have, I've Ameca splendens, Zogoneticus tequila, Scyphia francese, which are all endemic to this little spring area called Teuchitlan, which is about an hour west of Guadalajara. And then a species that's found not, an hour or so from there. It was named after me, so I feel like I have to have it. Xenotoca lyonsi. So those are the 4.
That's right. You do have a fish named after you.
Yeah, that's pretty
I
cool.
didn't even mention that in the bio. Oh my goodness. Because I mean, I'm a broken record on this one. To me, like that is such a marker of the impact that somebody's had on the hobby that you actually have a fish named after you. Now,
Yeah, that was truly one of the great honors of my life. And, again, the people who described it are friends of mine, and they were making a nice gesture to me. And, and so some of it comes from that, but because they're friends,
mm-hmm.
but nonetheless, it was it was a great honor. And I really was extremely flattered and excited by that. And it was a complete surprise. I knew they were working on this group of Goodeid, a single species, was being broken up into 3 species based on some new, primarily genetic information. And I knew it was coming, and I'd been talking to them about their work and was aware of what they were doing, and that they were in the process of, splitting the species up and describing 2 new things. But I had no idea they were going to name after me. And then one friend of mine said, "Hey, this paper of the species, um, you know, description is out. Here's a copy." And he sent me a PDF, and I was busy with something else. Oh, yeah, thanks. And I didn't even look at it. And, said, "I'll look at that later." And a couple hours later, he goes, "Well, what do you think of the paper?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm busy. Why are you, I'm like, "All right, let me look at it." And then I saw they named after me, and, I was flabbergasted. I,
So this is
I
great.
couldn't believe it. And
You
then he's smirking,
Goodeid
but
work.
otherwise, he sends me one of his papers. It's like, yeah, okay, I'll read it eventually, but it's
This
not
is
bugging me. What'd you think? What'd you think?
yeah, this is really cool. So you go to goodeidworkinggroup.com and the etymology section for this fish. The species is named for the prominent North American ichthyologist Dr. John Lyons, who has made substantial contributions to our understanding of the distribution, ecology, diversity, and conservation status of fishes in Mexico, and to Goodeids in particular. That's pretty awesome, John.
Yeah, it really is.
That
So,
is
and
pretty
again,
awesome.
these are friends of mine, so I don't want to downplay it, but they're being very nice to me.
Yeah, and it's a good looking fish too. What is that? The male that's got that nice splash of orange on the caudal and
Yeah,
the
yeah, they have
anal
it's
fin.
they call the original one Xenotoca Eisenai, which is what was split up. Was always called the red-tailed Goodeid because the males, it looks like their back half's been dipped in orange or
Mm-hmm.
reddish paint. They really are a pretty species, and they're interesting. They're a little bit pugnacious, and but they get along. They're not the worst, and in terms of getting along with each other, and you can flock breed them, and so it's been really fun to have them. And I don't know what I have 4 tanks of them right now,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Since I wanted to circle back eventually to Wisconsin, but since we're on the topic of Mexico and your experiences there, roughly how many trips have you made to Mexico? And this would be starting in the 80s, right? With that first trip down.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I counted this up a few few months ago before COVID hit because I was on a trip to Mexico and came back the very beginning of March, just as everything was locking down. Um, so in terms of total trips, including kind of like vacations and that sort of thing, I've been there 51 times.
Wow.
And in terms of and then I've been to several other places in Latin America as well. So we're probably closer to 60 to Latin America. And then in terms of scientific things that are primarily scientific visits and collecting visits and things like scientific conferences, that kind of thing. It's about 40 or so. And
Wow.
that the first the first time I was in Mexico was 1984, and the first scientific was when I went to help Eduardo on his survey of the Sierra de Manalan was 1986. So 34 years ago for
And
that.
the Sierra de Matazlan, is that what
Manatlan.
Manatlan? What part of Mexico is that in? Because on to my left, I have my iPad up with the map of Mexico, and
Sure.
I always like to have that visual as I talk about something.
Yeah, it's almost it's in the west coast of Mexico in the state of Jalisco.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sierra de Manatlan itself, as the crow flies, is about 60 miles inland, and it's about 100 miles west and a little bit south of Guadalajara. It's also about 60, 70 miles southeast of Puerto Vallarta.
Okay.
So if I don't know how detailed your map is, the towns near it are called Outlan and El Grullo, and the nearest resort areas. There's one called Manzanillo, which is sort of on the edge of the reserve, and a place called Bar de Navidad and Malaque. And so it's near the coast, but far enough inland that that you can't see the ocean or anything like that. There's a ridge of hills between you and the ocean. You're about 60 miles away.
And it isn't Jalisco, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's the southern end of it extends a little into the state of Colima.
Okay. I think I should.
Most of it's in Jalisco.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in that area. All
Yeah.
right.
There's it's a little mountain range, maybe 25 miles by 5 miles, and there's just a whole series of small coastal and subcoastal villages there, and they each have their own name. And so this is one particular piece of that.
Have your travels? I'm guessing maybe no, but like, have your travels throughout Mexico? Has it kind of extended where you've hit every one of the states in Mexico, or has it just primarily been concentrated to like West Coast and central regions?
No, I've hit every state in Mexico.
Oh, nice.
I can't say I've collected in every state in Mexico, but I think there are 31 states, 32 if you count the Mexico City, which is now sort of a quasi-state. And I've collected, I think, in all but one of them, maybe two of them. So yeah, I've worked all over, from the Yucatan to Chiapas on the Guatemalan border, up to the U.S. border in Nuevo Leon, and in Sonora and Tamaulipas, and so all over the place. Again, the majority of work has been in central Mexico, but all the way from the West Coast on the Pacific to the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico, and then lots of projects and excursions to the north and the south of that. So.
Yeah, I lived in San Diego for about 3 years, and I've only dipped my toe into travel into Mexico with a church group. I went down for a day to Tijuana to hang out at an orphanage, and that was a really, really fun experience. And that's 2000, maybe 2010. So certainly not like during the the good old days when you could just roll across the border and everything was all good.
Yeah.
So it was going with a group that very well experienced, had been there before, knew exactly where to go. But it's talking to like Jose Gonzalez, when he talks about the Goodeids and going down there collecting, it's so sad that it's so close to us, but I would love to go there, but it's so hard to ignore what's happening in the news, just where the violence seems like it's kind of almost everywhere. And I'm by no means am I a geopolitical or international affairs expert on what's happening down there, but I know so many people that, having lived in California, having lived in San Diego, that have roots in Mexico and that are born there, live here, or they live there for a good portion of time. That it just seems like a place that I would love to go and travel. It's so close to us to be able to hop on a plane and be there in 3-4 hours. But and even in your most recent Amazonas article, that you throw these cautions out there that times have changed, and it's not what it was back when you were going in the 80s or 90s.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Even in the 80s and 90s, there were drug issues and there were places we didn't go, but it was much smaller scale and much, well, I won't say less dangerous, but the violence wasn't nearly so epidemic, really. The issue in Mexico with travel and with drug violence is it is geographic in nature, and where it's bad and where it's not bad vary over time. And so, yeah, some of the border areas have been consistently bad for a long time. Other border areas aren't bad at all. And that's true for when you get away from the border. There are some areas that are traditionally sort of a haven of drug cartels, and there's been a lot of violence. And then other areas that are relatively peaceful, and I won't say it's impossible for anything to happen there, but they just really aren't nearly as problematic. But that changes over time, and so a place that was really kind of scary 10 years ago might be okay now, but vice versa. Somewhere where you didn't really worry about it too much is now an area where there's a lot of violence, and it has to do with cartels fighting over turf,
right,
and where sort of boundaries are, where the where the point of contention is, and then sometimes the safest areas are actually dominated by a particular cartel, but that's the point. They're dominated
Right.
there, so there's no need, at least as a tourist. And I don't want to minimize the hardship and the pain that this causes for many Mexican citizens.
Yeah.
But if you're just there as an American tourist, and even as a scientist, you're basically there as a tourist. You're going to be okay. And so I've never had any trouble that way. But by the same token, I always work with Mexican scientists. I won't say always, but 99% of the time I'm working with collaborators in Mexico, and we always do our homework about an area. And we're aware, they're more aware than I am, of course, of where problem areas are, but we always check locally. And even if the town we're in is fine, we say, well, we want to go up in the hills here to look for this. We always ask, are they growing poppies there? Are they growing marijuana there? So, and the locals know, and the locals will tell you. And, again, we've never had any trouble. There are some areas where, we'll only go there in an official university or vehicle of some sort, rather than a private vehicle, and we'll only go during the daytime. And so things like that. But that being said, I haven't had any trouble, knock on wood.
Where was this most recent trip to in Mexico? The pre-COVID, your last trip?
Yeah, the last trip we were in an area of East Central Mexico, primarily in the state of San Luis Potosí, and it's a really interesting, beautiful area. It's where what are known as the northern swordtails are. These are a whole bunch of different species of wild type swordtails, including the Montezuma swordtail, which you may have seen, which has the super long tail, and then but a whole variety. Some of them have essentially no tail at all, and it's a sort of a karstitic karst region with a lot of waterfalls and springs bubbling out, and big springs, spring-fed rivers, and each little basin will have its own species of swordtail. So we were doing some work there, looking at the status of a couple species and trying to get pictures of certain species. And it was just kind of a quickie trip with a couple of friends of mine, and cover an area and see some things that I hadn't seen, and some habitats that I hadn't seen. A couple of years previously, I had run a trip basically for interested aquarists, interested fish heads. I've done a couple of these where people come down, it's a small group, 8-10 people.
Sign me up. Let's go. Next one. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, you'd be welcome. But basically, I and one of my Mexican friends will set this up. We'll get a little mini bus and a driver. We'll set up an itinerary, and we'll go from place to place, showing people the habitats and the fish. And we had done one in this area before, and it had gone pretty well. And I wanted to do some more reconnaissance in some area, some specific spots that I hadn't been before, and check out a couple other areas, and with the thought of maybe doing this again in a couple of years. And again, this is all pre-COVID, so we'll see how things develop over the next couple of years. But yeah, that was the idea. And just sort of for my own scientific interest, see some of these things and understand them a little better. And I was familiar with most of the swordtails from that area, but there's a couple species I hadn't seen, so I wanted to see their habitat, and wanted to visit a lab. A guy, Gil Rosenthal, who is out of Texas A&M, has a lab actually in the state of Hidalgo, right on the border with San Luis Potosí up in the mountains. And he's done some really amazing, interesting work on hybridization between two native species of natural hybridization between two native species of swordtail endemic to this one area. And I wanted to see his lab, see some of the fish he'd been working with. I've been reading all his papers and talking about it, and nothing beats actually going to the spot and seeing it and handling some of these fish. So that was really fun. We were in the town that where his lab is, a little town in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, but they're having their annual it was it was their annual sort of town festival,
Right.
and it was really a lot of fun. It was Carnival basically, so it was right before, leading up to Easter, and there was a big street festival and parades and a fair kind of thing, and it was really a blast. So
And that's like honestly like 50% of the trip to Peru was experiencing Iquitos, experiencing what I could of their culture, of the everybody at nighttime going out to their plaza. Plaza de Armas was just
right,
cracking with all the families hanging out, and
yeah,
it's amazing being on the Amazon collecting, right? And it's amazing probably going to Mexico and being in these towns, but being able to experience like one of their annual celebrations. I mean that would culminate a trip for me. Like that would be 50% of the fun, 50% of the experience, and just really make it so awesome. And that, going to these places, it's not just for the fish, but it's also for the people and, what they do and, just how they live their
yeah,
lives and getting a broader perspective on just how people across the world live.
yeah. No, and again, even from a scientific point of view, much of maybe certainly the majority of my interest is in sort of ecology and conservation. And you can't just study the fish in that case. You have to understand the landscape, the geography, um, the plants, all the other biota. But you also have to understand the people who live in a particular area.
The economic situation,
Yeah, their economic
what they're
situation, their
doing to get
cultural
by.
situation,
Yep.
the political situation,
Hmm.
and obviously to do effective conservation in Mexico, you have to work with Mexican scientists and conservationists.
Hmm.
So that's always been a big part of the trips is you know meeting people, getting to be friends with people, experiencing some of the culture. And I don't pretend to visit an area for a few days to really understand it, but I have a sense of it. I
Hmm.
have a sense of what some of the issues are, both the environmental threats, um, some of the attitudes of the local people, who's calling the shots locally, uh, what the what the possibilities are, what the potentials are, and again, it's not going to be me per se doing things, but to work with my Mexican colleagues, I need to have that understanding to
Hmm.
be effective.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't pretend to wear this gringo savior cape or anything like that, but it
Right.
was it was so cool to be in Peru. We went to their manatee. What's the word I'm looking for here? Like rehabilitation center, I guess.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
and it's a partnership with Dallas Aquarium, I think, Dallas or
Hmm.
Atlanta Aquarium. Real cool facility. Got to see them, taking some blood samples and whatnot of manatees, and that was a really really cool experience. But to talk with some of the people there, some of the college kids from Lima that were doing a summer in Iquitos, working at this research center, and just talking about how there is this, even though Iquitos is not the cleanest city, right? And there's a lot of things where it's like, oh man, that's going to end up in the Amazon during the high
Right.
season. It's not the best as far as sanitation goes, but there is this move for them to educate the youth. And so, in a place like Iquitos that depends on ecotourism and that depends on, the Amazon River for
Hmm.
economic well-being, to hear that the next generation is very in tune with, yeah, let's conserve these manatees, let's conserve this natural resource that we have, and help it thrive. Do you see that same kind of thing happening where you go and travel in Mexico? And part of what is informing this question is, talking to Jose, in the previous conversation about Goodeid's, that there's like paper mill effluents runoffs from farms, and there's just not the best water practices. And even though, and I'm probably paraphrasing and butchering this conversation that I had with him, but it's like there is some government regulation and some attempts to help keep the waterways clean, but then it's like, yeah, maybe in some places they're kind of not following that. Like, do you?
Yeah. The environmental problems um, in Mexico are far worse than anything we have in the U.S.
For
I mean,
sure.
there really are some huge issues. The biggest one is that most of Mexico, at least the northern two-thirds of Mexico, is at least seasonally arid. And so there isn't enough water to go around.
Mm,
And so the water that is there, I mean, the number one threat to a lot of fish species is just, rivers and lakes drying up. and no water whatsoever. And then certainly there are all sorts of pollution and runoff from fields and so forth. And yeah, paper mill pollution is a big issue. That was a major thing we worked on in the Sierra de Manatlan, the river that goes along one side of it, had major pollution from a sugar mill. And then there's another place near Morelia where there's a major pollution from a paper mill. And, and I'm old enough to remember when this was commonplace in the U.S., so where you just had raw sewage or effluent going right into a river or lake. And we've turned things around here through the Clean Water Act and lots of other legislation. But back in the 60s, a lot of our waterways were pretty polluted. And we've made a lot of progress since then. And I see a lot of places in Mexico sort of where the U.S. was 50 or 60 years ago. So there are regulations on the books. There are efforts, underway, but Mexico is a much poorer country than we are. So the resources to invest in treatment and so forth and to enforcement of laws and things aren't there to the same extent. So progress has been slow. That being said, it's actually very inspirational, I think, to go and work with Mexican conservationists because they don't have the resources that are available in the U.S. There isn't the public awareness that maybe we take for granted in the U.S. of value of biodiversity, the value of clean water, things like that. There is certainly some, but it's not as pervasive as here. And these guys, these women, men and women, are able to do some amazing things just through hard work and shoestring operations. And some of the Goodeid conservation work that's been done, it really is exciting what they've been able to do with just kind of with local community support and some creative partnerships and getting a lot from very little money. And so this, where I mentioned earlier, the springs at Teuchitlan, which is west of Guadalajara, where Ameca and Zogoneticus tequila and Scipia francesa are all known from. The University of Morelia, they've had a big program to reintroduce Zogoneticus tequila there, and now they're in the process, which had been extirpated, and now they're in the process of beginning to reintroduce Scipia francesa. And I mean, it's just such a cool project. They don't have a lot of money, but they have all these, hardworking, enthusiastic students and some really good, dedicated faculty people. And they've made partnerships with the local municipal government in the town of Teuchitlan and some of the school teachers and so forth. So there's a really cool environmental education program. And they're using all these sort of creative ways to bring these species back. And yeah, there are still plenty of big problems and plenty of major challenges ahead, but they've been able to really do some cool stuff. And aquarists have played a role in that. Aquarists, a guy named Ivan Dibble who's now died, but he was an aquarist from England, and he had gotten some Zogoneticus tequila and maintained them in England, and in the meantime, they had disappeared from the wild in Mexico, and nobody had captive populations in Mexico, and I'm not even, maybe one person in the U.S. had them at the time. And so Ivan, who, again, he's not a biologist, he was just like a machinist, blue-collar worker from London.
Just a fish nerd. Just a fish nerd.
Yeah, a real, a guy with huge fish, all these species and so forth, and self-taught. And he made some connections with the folks in Morelia, brought some of these Zogoneticus tequila over on one of his visits, gave them some. A guy named Professor Omar Dominguez, he set up a facility in Morelia where they basically, it's called the Fish Ark, is in English for short, where he basically tried to set up all the still extant Goodeid species would be kept in captivity there. It'd be an ark, basically, where there was at least a couple tanks of everything that was still alive. And so they got Zoogeneticus going there, set up this facility, and then eventually, when they had a big enough colony of some of the species, they started to think about reintroducing them. And Ivan channeled a lot of effort from both Aquarius and public aquariums in Europe. He worked with people in the American Live Bearers Association here in the United States. And so Aquarius began contributing both fish that were going to be repatriated and technical expertise, helping the Mexican students set up tanks and manage tanks and breed fish and things like that, and then actually helping out sometimes in some of the projects. And so the Goodeid working group, its genesis was basically stuff that Ivan had started, and then Ivan died unexpectedly about 15 years ago. And so, he had been the driving force for a lot of these efforts. And so the Goodeid Working Group was a response to his death, basically. What do we do now? And a group of people throughout Europe, several different countries, but led by Michael Kirk, who's he works for a public aquarium or a large aquarium in Vienna. He started the Goodeid Working Group there. It came over to the U.S. He and I got together. I started helping on the U.S. end. And so that was my, I'd been working in Mexico strictly as sort of a scientist. And so by the early 2000s, I became aware of these hobbyists who were also interested. And I sort of connected with them and sort of got back into the hobbyist end of things when it came to dealing with Goodeids and other Mexican rare species. And so again, the conservation work that's being done, it's all kind of seat of the pants, low budget stuff, but it's been a combination of some really hard work and innovative work by Mexican scientists and conservationists, aided and complemented by actual aquarist work. So, where the fact that so-and-so kept this species alive in their fish tank for years meant that species didn't go extinct.
Yeah, I mean, and
that species was then spread around to other people. It's a little bit more secure now because it's in multiple places, and there are efforts underway, at least for some of the species, then to reintroduce them, to bring them back in nature as some of these underlying environmental problems are slowly dealt with.
Yeah,
but the environmental situation in Mexico is very, very dire. There's lots and lots of problems, particularly in central Mexico.
Well, the two pieces on the note of the reintroduction of tequila. One is the same Amazonas issue on Mexico that has your great article in about the Pacific Coast, kind of Pacific Coast area collecting. There is a really good write-up on this reintroduction effort. I think it spans like maybe 3 pages, a lot of pictures.
Yep.
And that's actually maybe within the next couple months. I would love to get one of the people that was a part of that to really come on the podcast and just deep dive that. The second part of
I'm on that article.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's like 4 or 5 people. Yeah. On there.
Yeah.
So okay.
There's
maybe
three Mexican.
Okay.
4 Mexicans, and then Michael Kirk from Vienna and me.
Well, I'd love to have you on again, or if we can reach out to one of the people in Mexico and just kind of really just dive into all the nuts and bolts of that, and turn that into its own episode. Because I think there's just so much there that, I think that article is great. Everybody should go and read that. But that just sounds like something that, really dive into.
I think she's the first author. I don't have it. Yes, I do have it in front of me. Hold on a second. I think it's. I
forgot to bring my issue as a prop. Well, you've got yours.
No, let me.
Well, while you look for that, the second part.
Oh, I got it right here. I'm just flipping to the page. So go, but go ahead.
I was gonna say, this is a really great proof in the pudding story for like the CARES organization, right? Where, this idea of home aquarists keeping endangered, extinct in the wild species, for the hope that someday there could be reintroduction efforts. And I would say, like a skeptical person could look at that and say, that's never going to happen. Like, if the environment's jacked, it's done with, you guys are just wasting your time kind of thing. But to have this story like, no, this is the scenario. Like, it was literally a guy in England that kept this fish originally from, central western Mexico, was able to get it back to Mexico. They were able to kind of do this ARC project, build up a really healthy population, and do a reintroduction of this species. It's like, no, we were actually able to do it. Like that is such a cool, proof of concept and actual, success story that this is real.
Yeah, well, I completely agree, and I have that. Often people, when I'm talking about Goodeid conservation, they'll say, "Well, yeah, what's the point? We're keeping these species, but a lot of these places in Mexico are so devastated; they're never going to be rehabilitated. We're never going to get these fish back there." And it's true. There are places that are probably never going to be
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitated, but there are enough places that have potential, and the Lyons Springs is certainly one of the best where this absolutely can happen. And again, we have a real world example. I give complete credit to the folks in Morelia for doing this project and doing it right, doing it well. This wasn't some sort of a half-ass. Well, let's just get a bucket of fish and throw them in there. It
Mm-hmm.
was. They did all sorts of preliminary work, investigations. They made sure the fish weren't carrying exotic parasites, all sorts of things. And they had the big issue in Tuchitlan is non-native invasive species, and so they had a big effort with invasive species. And then, to me, equally important, they worked with the local community. This wasn't done in isolation. It was, they want the local community to feel pride in this place, pride in this species, and to keep things going. And so anyway, um, yeah, it's a great project. It's inspirational, and I'm very proud to have played kind of a peripheral part in it. Um, but yeah, the first author of that article is named Aurelie Ramirez,
Mm-hmm.
and I know her pretty well, and her English is pretty decent, and so I think she'd be a great uh, candidate for a talk, and I can reach out to her if you want.
Oh, that would be awesome, John. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have to talk to her about something else anyway in the next few days. So.
So there's a crazy guy up in Washington State that wants to talk about fish with you. Does that sound like something you're interested in?
No, I think she'd love it.
Awesome.
She she um, she's been she's been in the States a few times to visit for various. In fact, she was going to be the American Live Bears Association convention was going to be in Florida back
Mm-hmm.
in June, and of course got canceled. But she was going to be there for that, so she's connected a bit with the hobbyist community too. And I don't, she's a graduate student, so she's busy working. I don't think she's maintaining, tanks in her
Mm-hmm.
house, but she's been working on this reintroduction project. Now she's working for a PhD on a different lake that it's the best, largest remaining intact Goodeid
Mm-hmm.
habitat in Mexico, and she's working on the community dynamics there and conservation of that entire community, which has I think 7 or 8 different species of Goodeids in it,
Mm-hmm.
as well as other species.
Yeah.
So she's pretty tuned into to some of the conservation issues, some of the impacts, and so forth. And yeah, and her English I think is good enough to be on something like this. And yeah, so I'll it might take a week or two, but I'll
Oh, no
reach out.
worries. Yeah, no worries, John. Yeah, this is this podcast has been going for God, I want to say I've been doing this now for 2 years.
Uh-huh.
Trying to put out episodes at least once every week or 2 weeks. It's been a little tough these past few months with having a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old plus a full
Yeah,
time plus a full time job. But
yeah, well, you
I
don't need sleep.
I try and hit every facet of anything that's going to be related to the tropical fish hobby, whether it's, having somebody that specializes in man-made fish like flower horn or having a fish food
Hmm.
manufacturer on. But my hard bias is always for like research scientists, people that are doing boots on the ground, hands-on research. And so I love bringing those voices to a broader, just aquarist, hobbyist, platform. And for some people, they may tune out and be like, "That's a little too far down the academic rabbit hole for me." But for me, I love it, and this is what I would want to hear if I was listening
Yeah.
to a podcast. So having somebody like an actual, a graduate student that is just eyeballs deep in research and being out there in the field or in a lab is just fantastic. And we haven't even talked about any of your, like local research in Wisconsin or any of those fish, or,
Right.
because I go on Google Scholar, and for any guest that's like you that actually has publications, I go and I do research and I look and see kind of what your body of knowledge of, the information that you've published. And yeah, so I mean, for me, it's just I just completely nerd out, and it's the stuff that I love. So
Well, I'll also I'll throw out that he's the last person in the author list on this, but his name I mentioned him already, Omar Dominguez, and he's the professor. He's been the head of Fish Arc. He's been the driving force behind this, and I'll reach out to both of them because his English is pretty good, and he deserves credit for a lot of this stuff. So Aurelie would be a great spokesperson, but I don't want to.
yeah.
I don't want to slight him
Yeah.
because he
Well,
really has been. He's been the, and he has the history too. I mean, she's
mhm.
only been in the picture the last 4 or 5 years, and he's the guy who received the fish from Ivan Dibble back in the mid '90s.
Mm.
So he has that long history of how things have played out over the
Yeah.
years,
Well,
and being higher up in the system, he understands maybe some of the challenges as well a little better.
hey, bring them both, man. I'm always
Yeah,
looking for
I'll
always
reach
looking
out
for
to both
guests.
of them. I'll reach
That's
out to both
that's
of them.
awesome. So we can also do a little call to action too, John. So if you've got any, maybe it's the Goodeid working group, or if you've got a couple links to some of these, efforts in Mexico that you would like to shine a little light on, you can talk about them now. You can send me over links, and I'll put them in the show notes so people can go and check it out. Because I like to give people, if you're going to give me your time to come on the podcast, and there's no financial kickback or anything like that, but if you sell a product, if you promote a product, or if you just have an effort or a passion project, like I'm always happy to want to give the guests that opportunity to kind of share, go to Goodeid Working Group, check out the cool work that they're doing, donate to this project, like whatever it may be. Totally give you that opportunity. Shoot me over links, or you could talk about it right now if there was anything that immediately came to mind
Yeah.
that we haven't already talked about.
Like I said, I'm not in any kind of business or trying to sell anybody anything, but anybody who's interested in conservation of freshwater fishes, even if they're not particularly interested in Mexico per se or the Goodeids per se, I would still urge them to go to the Goodeid Working Group website, and you just type in Goodeid, Goodeid Working Group in Google, and it takes you right to the website, which is like goodeidworkinggroup.com. And that gives you a framework of sort of how we've tried to do things. We have no money, we have no budget, we have just a bunch of volunteers,
Yep.
and yeah, we'll take donations, but that money is just going to get turned around and plowed into projects in Mexico. We've given several $1,000s to support students, to buy gear, to support workshops, things like that in Mexico, and we try to raise money every year for that very purpose. We also encourage people and try to facilitate and promote people maintaining rare Goodeids in their homes as hobbyists, and provide a network where people can interact and talk and hopefully exchange fish when things get a little easier. But even if you're not into Goodeids, I think it's a really nice model for how you might do this with various cichlid species, or with other live bears, or with loricariids or something like that. So I'd urge people to look. Certainly, if you're interested in Goodeids and Mexico, absolutely. But even if you're not, it's worth looking to see how we've tried to do things and how we've tried to apply conservation in a real world context without a big fancy non-governmental organization and fundraising and all that kind of stuff. Just a bunch of interested scientists and hobbyists banding together and for a common goal.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my main promo. Go to the Goodeid Working Group, and go to the American Libraries website. The American Libraries Association has been a huge supporter and the Goodeid Working Group is kind of nested within that, the North American branch. So I want to promote them as well. But there's a lot of conservation interest, a lot of aquarists doing, maintaining fish specifically for conservation purposes, and contributing fish and time and money, and their own expertise to promoting conservation on the ground
Mm-hmm.
in Mexico. And I think it's been beneficial in Mexico for sure. And I think it's a nice model for for doing it elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. I see that the Goodeid Working Group has conventions. They do American convention, Mexican convention, and European conventions. It seems like every year. I was gonna ask if you actually go to those, and sure enough, I see you as speaker at these conventions listed here. That seems like a good time going out to whether it's the UK or Vienna
Yeah,
to meet with a
yeah,
bunch of fish nerds and talk Goodeids.
it was. I was in the UK last November. So basically, what it works is we have the European branch and the North American branch, and the European branch meets once, sometimes twice a year, somewhere in Europe. It rotates around. And this past year, it was in Chester, England, which is right outside of Liverpool, and at a place called the Chester Zoo, which is a big zoo in England, and it's been very involved in conservation work, including conservation work in Mexico. So it was a fitting place to meet there, and so we have a European meeting every year. We have a North American meeting every year, which is always held in concert with the American Libraries Association meeting, which again was canceled this year. Next year, that's going to be in Detroit in April, assuming we can have it, and there'll be a Goodeid working group meeting within that, and we have everybody brings in all their fish. We have a fish auction to raise funds for conservation practices, typically in Mexico, and we have some speakers. It's really pretty fun.
Is it
Um,
somewhat open to the public, or is it you have
it's
to
well,
kind of?
you have to register.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a meeting, and ideally, you'd become a member of the American Libraries Association. The
Mm.
Goodeid working group, you just tell me you're interested and you're a member. Send me your email. That's the requirement there. But to actually participate in the American Libraries Association, it's like $25-$30 a
Mm-hmm.
year, and you're a member, and you get a journal and the whole bit. So, but yeah, anybody who wants to can show up, and and then what we've been trying to do, we've done it twice so far, is every 4 years we have both the European and the North American group meet um, together in Mexico and meet with our Mexican colleagues, get everyone in one place. We'll have some presentations. We'll hold it somewhere where we're close to an important Goodeid area. So when was it? In 2017, we met in Guadalajara, and we went to Teuchitlan and saw the reintroduction, and had Areli and Omar and other people from that group. We met with the local municipal government, and they were talking, about their involvement, and so it was really interesting. And then we went, and actually, this is a clear spring, so you can go snorkeling with the fish and everything.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, so it was a really good time. So about every 4 years, roughly, we try to do one of those. So I guess the next one would be, when was it? 2018. So the next one would be
Mm-hmm.
2022, I guess, somewhere in Mexico. That'd be so every 4 years we try to do that. That's a lot more involved to set up, so we
Yeah.
can't do it here.
And in the logistics of going from the States down to Mexico, you're probably doing some connecting flights either out of Dallas or Atlanta, and you're flying into Guadalajara.
Yeah, it depends where you're coming. I can fly direct from Chicago. LA, you can fly direct. Atlanta, Dallas, Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Guadalajara is the second biggest city, so there's lots of connections. We did one in Morelia a few years before that, and then you could either fly into Mexico City and connect, or fly into Mexico City and take a bus. And that was kind of fun. And so yeah, but we'll see what happens going forward with that. But the meetings are a lot of fun, and certainly when you're in Mexico, then you actually get to see the actual environment, see it firsthand, and
Mm-hmm.
talk to the people involved, and again, experience the culture, experience the landscape, which is worth the price of admission alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that seems like a perfect opportunity if, granted, I'm not necessarily throwing an open door, but I guess if somebody was hardcore enough and was, all in for Goodeids, members of the ALA, got kind of permission from you, that just seems like, to go with and try to be in the safest group possible, to go in a group like that, to be able to go down to
Yeah,
Mexico as
yeah.
opposed to like you and a buddy, flying into
No,
Guadalajara and
exactly.
trying to, do this yourself and recreate these adventures.
No, exactly, because yes, we're completely committed to safety, and we sort of know the lay of the land, and we know where to go. That also makes it cheaper. We can set some things up, and transportation and lodging and food and everything. It's much cheaper than if you're just sort of winging it. And then you're with people who really understand this. You're not saying, well, what is this? There's someone who can tell you and give you the history. They can talk about what you're eating, what that mountain is in the distance, what that plant is, so it's not just fish, it's everything. And it's just fun. It's just, we'll have people who are interested we have these people who come on some of the trips and meetings. They're into what's called microfishing, and their idea is to catch as many different species as they can on hook and line. And so they have these tiny, and I've done it, and they have these tiny hooks. And so their goal was to catch some of these Goodeids on hook and line.
Oh, jeez.
So they did. And, I could truthfully say to some of these people, you're probably the only person on Earth who has ever caught this species on a hook before.
I'm a fisherman. I love fishing. I've fished in the kelp beds in San Diego from a kayak.
Yeah.
I've fished in the Puget Sound. I've fished, for bass all over the place. I love fishing. Do you have to kind of do that like off to the side so like the research scientists in Mexico like don't see you catching?
No.
Are they cool with that?
No, because, I'm the research scientist. Omar's, again, people are handling it gently. They catch, a couple and they're done.
Okay.
They're not killing them. They're not
Okay.
mishandling it. It breeds interest in them. It's legal. You actually don't need a fishing license to fish in Mexico unless you're in a boat. So it's just sort of a fun little pastime. And that's not the only thing they did. It was just, we're here, we're going to catch these fish. And so a bunch of us ended up trying it. It was a gas, because, these fish are literally 1.5 inches long. And so it's actually challenging because their mouth is so small that even with these special custom hooks you get from Japan, which in Japan, microfishing is a big deal. Even with these special, these are tiny. It's hard to keep the fish hooked, and it takes a little bit of skill. And so it's really fun trying to catch all these different species there. And everyone had a big, we're drinking beers and sitting, standing in the water because it's a nice warm day and catching fish. And then we're going to have some tacos. And in the meantime, then we're going to go snorkeling with these reintroduced.
John, you've got me sold, man. You've got me sold.
It was pretty fun.
Well, Michael Barber,
my wife came along, and she's not a hardcore fish person, but she loved it.
Well, I probably
it's just
went.
a beautiful setting. The people are just so warm and nice and friendly, and it, and you're in the Teuchitlan is in the shadow of the Tequila volcano, which is a dormant volcano, and that's where the drink gets its name. So you are in the heart of tequila country there. And this isn't, college throwing down shots. This is drinking the real high-end premium stuff, sipping it. So that's really fun, too, if you're into any kind of drinking or anything.
Well, talking to 30, 40 people doing, a good number of episodes, and then talking to Michael Barber, and always knowing that it was on my bucket list to go to Peru, do collecting and whatnot. But talking with him and him saying that, this particular trip is actually going to be on one of the traditional Amazon River style boats. And, not only are you collecting fish on the river, but we're also fishing for piranha. I'm like, fishing for piranha sold me. And I said, all right, I'm going to go to war with my wife. I'm going to make this trip happen. And it was, and now you've sold me on this idea of fishing and hanging out down in Mexico. So hopefully in a couple of years it goes down and I can stay in touch with you. And
I'll definitely I have a list of people if a new trip or any kind of a meeting like this.
I'm on it.
I have a mail. You'll go on.
Perfect.
But no, it really is. It's if you're interested in just hanging out at the beach and drinking margaritas, this is not that. But it's super fun.
I can do that. I can do that for about 5 minutes, and then I'm like, okay, let's go do something. That was fun. I laid down for 5 minutes. Let's go.
Yeah, and I'm sort of that way. I can do it for more than 5 minutes, but just a couple of days. I'm not someone who's going to spend a whole week just laying on the beach. And the funny thing I tell people, and this is absolutely true, I've been to Puerto Vallarta many times because it's sort of near where I work and on the way to things. But the first 4 times it was the 5th time I was in Puerto Vallarta that I actually saw the ocean.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, because it was the nearest town of any size with any kind of accommodations and food stores and stuff to where we're working in the mountains. And so we'd be out all day working, and not, sometimes in coastal rivers, but not right next to the ocean. And then at night we'd come back to the town, and we did 3 or 4 expeditions. So you wouldn't see the ocean. You'd be in some cheap hotel away from the beach. You'd get in after dark. You'd leave early in the morning, and then you'd be there for a couple of days, and then you'd roll on to a different place somewhere else. And so it wasn't until I actually went to a conference that was in Puerto Vallarta that was in one of these, all-inclusive hotels on the beach that actually saw the ocean in Puerto Vallarta.
Well, I think in your article you talk about like I'm almost positive it's your article where you say, bring the spouse and kids down, leave them at the resort, and then you go and do your thing. Well, obviously with, locals and, with proper preparation, you can then go and do your collecting.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm usually there on, some kind of a collecting trip. But if you were just there on vacation, that's the whole idea of that article. You could take an afternoon, you could get a local taxi guy for fairly reasonable to take you off, 30 minutes away up to some of these coastal rivers. Just bring a dip net and a snorkel, and tell the taxi guy to wait or to come back in a couple hours, and you can see these fish in their natural habitats, catch them, and it's not technically legal to bring them back. Some people do, but you don't have the necessary permits to do that. But some people sneak them through or talk their way through customs. But legally bringing back fish from Mexico is very complicated. But
I don't want to break any laws in Mexico, man.
No, I don't need, particularly since I'm doing this.
You're a brave person. Well, not you, but whoever does this, man.
No, I don't either. And
Yeah.
and I, on the one hand, it'd be valuable to get some of these fish into the U.S.
Oh, for sure.
And we've through Goodeid Working Group done a couple of shipments where we've jumped through all the hoops and paid lots of money to importers and things like that. But it's really a pain in the butt and pretty expensive to do it legally. And yet I know there are lots of people and they're doing it for the best of motives, who sneak fish in. And but I'm not doing that, and I'm not advocating that. I will just say that to do it legally is very complicated.
That is the next Netflix series where they follow Americans that go to these, Mexico or somewhere like Western Africa, and it's all about bringing back fish for the sake of like CARES conservation. Like that sounds like a Netflix series to me right there. Like they're in their hotel room, it's all super shady, and they're showing them how they put it in the socks and all that stuff.
Well, that is kind of how it is.
I know. I've talked to people that do it. I know it, and I'm just like, you're crazy. Yeah. I'm not doing that.
A lot of my European friends, because often it'll be not only people from the States who will go and work with the Mexican scientists, but sometimes some European colleagues will come over, and they're aquarists. They're not scientists, and they'll do that.
They're ruthless. I feel like
they have suitcases, and they go through certain airports only because those are the airports where they just scan your luggage. They don't actually open it and inspect it. They have it all down.
Yeah.
And then they have a song and dance if they're caught at it's coming into the EU.
No.
And they get their fish back.
No sabes. They just say, what? No sabes.
Yeah. And the worst that's going to happen on the Mexican end, if you were inspected, is they just confiscate them. You're not really going to get in that big of trouble, but
hopefully,
or you probably pay a bribe and get them through, to be honest. But the bigger issue is in your home country, and I don't want to be on a list somewhere in the U.S. for being a shady character coming in.
Yeah.
And so I always am above board with it, but I have to say it's a pain in the butt.
I feel like from what I've heard in conversations I've been in, like the Europeans are the most ruthless when it comes to like, bringing stuff, taking stuff out of country, again, for the best of intentions, right? To work with these fish and their fish rooms and all that good stuff. But like you're saying that they've got their systems and they know, they know at every point, like what their story's going to be.
Yep.
That's a Netflix series, man. I'm telling you.
Well, the other thing, even if it was completely legal or you had all the paperwork, people always ask me, well, why don't you bring some fish back? Why don't you do this? And I have to say, having done this, you can either go there to collect fish to bring back, or you can go there and do research. It's just the workload for both of them when I'm there is just too hard to do both of them at once, if that makes any sense.
No, 100%.
So, we put in these, when we're doing a project there, we put in these 14-hour days and are just whipped, when we get back to wherever we're staying. And the last thing I want to do is spend the next 2 hours, changing water and trying to keep these fish alive and packaging them up for moving to the next town and things like that. And so typically when we've done these sorts of things, basically there'll be a couple of people who's, if we're actually going to try to bring fish back, there's a couple of people who that's sort of their job. They just maintain the fish and take care of the fish, and they might not even go out in the field some days because there's enough to do once you have a good number of fish there. If you really want to keep them alive, particularly if you catch them early in the trip and you're not going to leave for a week or two, there's a lot of work to do. So that's the other reason why bringing fish back. It's either you go there to specifically collect fish that you're going to bring back and you focus on that, or you go there to collect data and do the research and whatever it happens to be. And it's really hard to marry the two.
Yeah.
And I've done it a couple times, and it was exhausting.
Yeah, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but that's one of the things I've really appreciated about getting into birding and bird photography is that, there's no temptation. There's no temptation that I'm going to go and, net that warbler and bring it home and put it in my aviary. Like, because it just, that's not a thing. Maybe it is for some really eccentric people,
Have to carry tanks and buckets and air stones and drugs and and clear customs and all that sort of. No, I like birding too, and I was listening to your podcast where you were talking about how you've gotten into it.
It's fun. It's fun.
It is a lot of fun, and part of the fun for me is it is so low tech. I just have binoculars and I go out and I look at birds, and I'm not loading up waders and electroshockers and clipboards and all this other stuff. So when I travel to Mexico, even though most of the gear I use is already there, just carrying down my boots and jugs for preserving stuff and
I'm
field materials. It's I always am right on the limit of allowed luggage and weight and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit I've invested in the 200 to 600 millimeter lens that weighs like 17 pounds, and so I'm getting these close up shots. But part of the reason I'm doing that is because I'm still so new. I want those photos. One, I love to share them because it's fun to share these bird photos. Because I hope that there's like this new generational breed of like birders that are like going outside and looking at birds is cool, but for identification. Because I'm not anywhere at a point where I'm like, aside from my backyard, which I know like the 5 or 6 dominant species that visit my bird feeders, being able to go back, look at an image blown up, change some settings to really bring out some color, and then make a proper identification and go into my eBird app and say, yep, I've seen that bird on this date.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I've been birding for 50 years, so I'm not an expert by any means, but I know a lot of stuff, and I'm used to just using binoculars, but I know people who take pictures, and it's wonderful. They're amazing.
Listeners are like, oh boy, Randy's going down the birding rabbit hole. Here he goes.
Well, the one thing I will say as far as these trips is we've had a couple people on them who were just as interested in birds as they were in fish, and so they would spend half their time. Because we're pretty low key. It's like, if you want to hang out at the hotel or go walk in the woods, that's your, whatever. You don't have to go do whatever the planned exercise is that day. And so we've had a number of people go birding, and they've seen some amazing things and see some amazing, have some amazing pictures. And I'm interested enough in birding that I will sometimes, get up and go with them early in the morning. And there's there's some amazing birds. There's just, I don't know, 30 different species of hummingbirds, and depending on where you are, in the South, most places we go, once you get out of the true highlands, you see parrots, You can, just spectacular, frigate birds near the coast, and one of my favorites, the vermilion flycatcher, which is just this beautiful bird that's in sort of the dry scrub. And
Mm-hmm.
so even if you're not seriously birding, but just driving around, caracara, falcons, and chachalaca, birds up in the calling from the woods and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
that adds to the whole experience, and I've been fortunate to be out in the field with some people who are good birders, and learned a little bit from them, although I by no means an expert on Mexican birds.
Yeah. As much as we should probably just do another episode where we talk about birding. uh,
Yeah,
how
and I'm not the guy.
how is Puerto Vallarta right now? As far as obviously COVID's a thing, but from a from in this is not John giving travel advice by any means, but from your opinion, like how is Puerto Vallarta right now, safety wise?
Well, the COVID issue is huge,
Right.
and so that has to be resolved. Mexico is struggling with it just as much as the U.S. is. It's one of the worst parts in the world. But assuming COVID is somehow brought to heel, for the moment, Puerto Vallarta is okay. And Puerto Vallarta, you have to remember, it's actually, as I think I said in the article, the resort area is it's about 50 miles of coastline. There is the town of Puerto Vallarta itself, which was, the original resort area, and that's where the airport is. But there's a whole series. There's an area north of it called Nueva Vallarta. There's the area Mismaloya to the south. There's an area that's become very trendy to the north called Sayulita. Um, those, there's just a series, and there are different types of resorts depending on what you're looking for. So there's, in Puerto Vallarta itself, the kind of the older, funkier beach hotels, and you're right within walking distance of all the clubs and bars and restaurants and souvenir places, lots of activity. And then if you go north to Nueva Vallarta, it's a lot of all-inclusive places, which, some people sneer at them, but they're wonderful. you know,
Of
they're
course.
super comfortable. You can eat all you want. You're completely on your own. Do whatever you want. You're in this kind of private area where it's quiet. And then Sayulita is that's like a surfer place, and it's kind of all these little beachfront restaurants with really, really good food. And then there's, various little jungly, touristy places in between. And then Miss Maloya is sort of a cliff-like area. So the hotels are built on cliffs, and it's a few miles from the sort of the touristy stores and everything. So it's more the kind of place you go if you just want to chill and watch the ocean, and and relax, and have a real mellow time, and you're not out clubbing every night and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So you can kind of pick the experience you want, and it's pretty safe. As the resort areas, by and large, with a couple of exceptions, are okay. Um, that isn't to say, there's no place that's 100% safe, but that's probably true in most parts of the world.
For sure.
So that isn't a bad area to go. And there's Acapulco is a little rough these days, but most of the other places are okay.
What would you say to kind of leave this, to conclude this podcast? If somebody, wanted to try to get something together outside of, like a Goodeid working group organized thing, and, they wanted to do some homework, what would be, that's going to have, maybe it's swordtails, maybe it's some other of the native cichlids of Mexico. What would be like a region where you're like, right now of the places, August 21st, 2020, this is a pretty as good as it's going to get, Mexican area where, you could be pretty safe, still do your homework kind of thing.
Yeah, if you weren't super particular about, I want to see this particular group, which is only found in a certain part of the country, I would absolutely go to Cancun, the Yucatan.
Mm,
That's a complete tourist area. It's got lots of spectacular, it's got the Caribbean, it's got Mayan ruins. So there's lots of other things to do. But a lot of the attractions there are in these sinkholes they call cenotes, which are, it's a flat karst topography where there's these sinkholes, that are filled with water, and they're full of cichlids, and they're full of little tetras, and they're, there's no swordtails there, there's no Goodeids there, but but you can snorkel in these things and see the cichlids. Some of them you can fish in. Um, some of these are right by the road and are super touristy. Some of them, if you rent a car and are feeling adventurous, they're kind of a little bit off the beaten track. There are lots of them. And they're just wonderful to swim in and to see stuff. And so Cancun is super easy to get to, super cheap. There's every kind of accommodation from cheap, funky town hotels to these really fancy all-inclusive places on the beach. You can go scuba diving in the ocean. You can go scuba diving in these cenotes. If you just wanted to see some native fishes in their native habitats, that's the simplest place. There's lots of tours that go out to these cenotes. Some of them are well known, and they're kind of swimming areas. And they'll have a tour like where you'll go to a Mayan ruin for part of the day. Then you'll go, you might be hot and sweaty, so you go to a cenote and go swimming and and relax and have something to drink. And so that's a super easy way to
awesome.
see that.
Because I was mildly concerned as I was asking you that question that you were going to come back with like, I don't know if there's really anywhere that I'd point to. But to hear that Cancun, that's great.
And that article, again, most of the places in that article, if you get too far afield from those, or you go up in the mountains from some of those areas, it can be dicey. But if you're in the resort itself, and then you ask around and you listen to what people say, don't dismiss their warnings.
For sure.
Don't say, "Oh, I know they're exaggerating." Don't know. But so a lot of those places, they are in proximity, some little rivers that have some really interesting stuff in them. And then of course you have the ocean. I'm just talking strictly about freshwater here, but there's all the ocean species, both for scuba and snorkel, for fishing, for just tide pooling, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you got sharks and crocodiles in the ocean, though. I gotta.
Well, you get crocodiles in the estuaries.
This is true. This is true.
There's a place south of, a little aside, there's a place, it's about 2 hours south of Puerto Vallarta, just north of Bar de Navidad and Malaque, which are another sort of smaller, funkier resort area. And it's called, I think it's called La Manzanita. And it's a little town, and it's kind of at a little sort of lagoon. And the town has protected and promoted their crocodile population.
Oh, boy.
And so you go into this little town, it's a funky little Mexican town, and there's sort of like a walkway overlooking the lagoon. You look down, and they're just crocodiles everywhere. And in town, there's you're sort of up about 10 feet, and there's a guardrail and everything. But you walk to where that intersects the beach. Well, the beach is wide open to the lagoon, and you look down the beach, and there's some crocodiles pulled out on the lagoon side of the beach.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool, actually. These are big. I mean, these are like 10 foot.
Oh yeah. What was it? 2 months ago, Pam Chin gave her Lake Tanganyika talk via Zoom to the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society, and
Right.
I'm all aboard about going to Lake Tanganyika. But then she talks about a couple of these areas that are known, like, yep, that's exactly where crocodiles are, and they still went in the water. Well, she was much more hesitant, but her European counterparts were just, being European, I guess, to throw the most, egregious generalization out there. And the guides were like, oh, it's before 12 noon. There shouldn't be any crocodiles there. But after 12 is when they roll in. And these guys were still going in the water, like where it's known man-eating crocodiles in the lake. And that's just, that just gives me goosebumps. Just hearing her talk about that experience.
It also has aquatic cobras.
Yes. She had a run-in with one of those on one of her trips too, where she like pops up out of the water and there's a cobra like from her face swimming in the water. It's like, oh my God.
No, I've never been and probably never will go. Just too old to put that on my bucket list. But there was a professor here at the university who subsequently left, but he'd been working in Tanganyika for years, and he had all kinds of stories.
Oh man, there's a lot of things there that could eat and kill you, or poison you, or whatever it is.
My biggest, a buddy of mine works in Kenya, and their biggest fear in terms of macro things getting in the water was actually hippos.
Yep.
And they're much more dangerous if you're working around water than snakes or crocodiles.
Well, it's the number
Not
one.
that those are minimal.
Yeah, it's like the number one like animal. Like it's the number one killer of humans on the
Yeah.
continent,
And
right?
so
Like
he
animal wise.
said they always had a local guide, and those guides could just look at the water and say, yeah, there's hippos here. We shouldn't go in the water. And they said one day their local guy was not there for whatever reason, and they had some younger substitute guy who wasn't as knowledgeable, and they went to this pool on this river, and the younger guy said, yeah, I don't think there's any hippos here. We can start setting our nets.
Oh boy.
They went out in the boat, and they got out and they started setting their nets, and all of a sudden they realized, no, there's hippos here. And it was like this frantic race to shore. They just left the nets in the water and just got out in time. And he said it was pretty scary.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's yeah, well, I think we're gonna leave it at that, John. We're about to bump up to your hard stop, man. This might be a record for the longest interview, John, and it has been an absolute blast.
Well, it really has, Randy, and thank you so much for inviting me. This has been fun.
No, absolutely. And if you're available in the next couple months, I want to reconnect and finally get a chance to talk about those Wisconsin fish, because
Sure.
I feel so guilty that I don't give enough love to the native fish that we've had. I've had a couple people on to talk about the fish that we have, but just to kind of unpack your experience with them, some of the research that you've done, and just give an aquarist a broader perspective on, oh yeah, we do actually have some pretty cool fish that maybe you're not going to keep a walleye in an aquarium, but it's kind of cool to know this behavior, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, and then there are loads of fish, at least in the Midwest, that are really easy and amenable to keeping an aquarium and actually breeding in aquariums.
Well, there was, I think it was
that's your end of things.
I think it was one of
And so,
Heiko Blair's aquariums at SIPS 2019 in China. He had set up a biotope for long-ear sunfish, and
yeah.
and it was amazing. It was a beautifully set up tank with beautiful fish.
Oh, no, long-eared sunfish, that whole group, we have a form of that here. It's a spectacular species. And no, and there's darters, there's various minnows that are, some of them are quite colorful, and all sorts of interesting, funky stuff. And I actually am working on a project here where we're reintroducing one of the local endangered species, and kind of not quite the same as the Mexican Zogonetis tequila situation, but has some parallels. And so yeah,
That's the
so
trailer.
happy to talk about that.
You just gave the trailer for part 2 with John. That's awesome.
Okay, yeah, happy to talk.
There we go.
I'm not going anywhere, especially these days.
Yeah, this has been perfect for guests. It's like, well, they're stuck at home. They might as well talk to me.
Yeah, really.
Well, John, thank you so much, man. This has been an absolute blast. It's been great connecting with you, and yeah, look forward to talking with you again, and hopefully some future trips down to Mexico with you.
Absolutely, I'll put you on the list, and I will reach out to the folks in Mexico and see if they're interested, and if they are, I'll put you in touch.
Awesome, John. Thank you so much.
Okay, Randy, you take care.